Hello fellow booktubers, my name is Lauren and you're watching Dreams Books Courage. Today is the start of a new series on my channel which is based around required reading that I've had to do throughout high school and college. I'm planning on doing a video within the series after every semester that I complete at college, but I also feel like I need to catch up with the past 2 semesters since I have not done a video on those yet. And I also want to do these videos on my high school reading and maybe even middle school and elementary school reading as well, but definitely let me know down below if you'd like to see more videos like these. The reason why I feel like doing these videos is because I feel like assigned reading has kind of been a big part of my reading experience, and also it's up to the teacher and how that teacher teaches the book. I feel like that has a huge influence on how you interpret that book, and I also feel like that kind of determines your enjoyment level of that book. I definitely feel blessed to have had a lot of amazing English teachers in my life. And so I'm just really excited to be talking about the required reading that I've read because for the most part I've really enjoyed it and it's definitely had an impact on my reading process and just my experience with reading overall. Sometimes it dramatically impacts it and then sometimes I just end up enjoying it and not really thinking that hard on it. So let's go ahead and get into the books that I read my first semester of freshman year at college. So these videos will definitely be varying in length. Because my first semester at college I only had to read 3 books, but then my second semester I read over 10 books, so it just kind of depends on how many English classes I have and really what those English classes are teaching and what they're geared for. I am majoring in English in college and also journalism, and I'm minoring in Latin, so I'm definitely going to be having a lot of English classes over 4 years. For my first semester at college, everyone has to take the same English, and this English is actually called Discernment and Discourse, and I think it's because this class is more geared towards you like working in a group and talking about the book and just discussing them instead of a professor just lecturing over the material within the novels. So it was definitely a different experience than the regular English classes are, but I ended up really enjoying it and getting to know my classmates better because of it. And I wasn't able to take an actual English class this first semester because you have to take the Discernment and Discourse class and pass it before you're allowed to take any other English classes. So it was definitely for the best because this class was way easier than my English classes have been, and it just kind of helped to get me into the groove of college. So whichever Discernment and Discourse class you take, they all have certain themes to them, and mine was 1960s film, music, and culture, which I find to be a pretty interesting subject in the first place, so I'm glad that I ended up taking this class. The first novel that I had to read was actually required university reading. We also talked about it within my class, and that book was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And I obviously have a few tabs from the parts that just kind of stuck out to me in different ways. I think the importance that my university wanted us to get out of this novel was how arts continue no matter what else is happening. So basically this is happening in a post-apocalyptic world, and there are quite a few main characters, but they all somehow tie back to this traveling symphony. And this traveling symphony usually does Shakespeare's plays, and I love Shakespeare's plays, so it was really cool to read about. I really love reading about dystopian societies, and although this was more post-apocalyptic than it was dystopian, I feel like those both kind of read the same, at least to me, and I did find it very interesting how art continued while the world was basically in ruins. I feel like this book definitely shows you the importance of art, and I personally found it to be quite well written. Plus my university actually took us to see one of the main plays that is talked about within Station 11, which is King Lear, and I felt like by seeing that play I kind of had a deeper experience of reading this novel. But King Lear is just an overall great play anyways, and while this is an educational read, I also find it to be a very enjoyable one. And now for the 2 novels that I specifically read for my English class. I did read so much more than just these 2 novels, but most of those things were just like clips from newspapers or short stories or things like that, and I primarily just want to talk about the novels that I've read within these classes. Although don't get me wrong, I definitely read way more than this in this English class. So the novel that I read next in this class was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, and I had actually never previously read this book, although it is a children's book. I don't want to talk too much about the premise of what these books are about within this video because I want this video to be more focused on the required reading and why it fit with the theme of the class. but I feel like this book needs a little bit of explaining because it is just so weird. It's about these 3 kids who meet these witches and they are sent to another world, basically. Honestly, this book didn't really leave a mark on me, and I barely remember that much of what it's about. I'm not a huge fan of middle grade, although this is quite a fast read. For some reason, it was just kind of hard for me to get through it. What I do remember is that there was some like communist elements whenever they entered this other world, and you wouldn't really expect those elements within a children's book. She did obviously want those elements in there for a reason, and by this time the 2 world wars had already happened. I feel like it was a Cold War that was happening during this time period, but that might be too late. And the Vietnam War began a few years after this, but also there was a lot of conformity coming out of the 1950s, and young people were kind of tired of it and challenging it at that time period. And I just feel like this is L'Engle's way of challenging conformity, although of course she put it in an extremist point of view. It was just really interesting to read about something that is so relatable to the time period, although it's placed in a fantasy world. Books often play a role in countercultural movements, and I think that this one definitely did within the 1960s. And the other novel that I read for my 1960s class was Slaughterhouse V by Kurt Vonnegut. And although this is fiction, a lot of the events that happen within this book are based on Vonnegut's life. I think this was based on his life during World War II, but I'm not completely certain on that. But this was published during 1969 during the Vietnam War, when a lot of younger people were having a lot of anti-war feelings. I really enjoyed this book both because of its content and also Vonnegut's writing style overall. And although he's writing about a different war than the Vietnam War, you can definitely see the similarities between the two. And this is definitely an anti-war book. It's about this man whose life keeps flashing back to earlier moments or later moments for whatever reason, and at one point in time he was abducted by aliens. And so just a lot of crazy things are happening in this book, but what I got out of it was that war cannot be explained within realistic scenarios. You kind of have to bring in a fantastical scenario in order to really understand it, which is kind of an out there concept, but if you read this book, I feel like you kind of get more out of that. This is my first read by Vonnegut, and I really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to read more of his work. Although he is a classic author, his writing style is definitely quite easy to read, so I definitely recommend it if you want an easier classic. But also just looking at this through the veil of the 1960s was just a very interesting way to look at things. I'm not big on history, and especially not wars. I just don't really care for like war books, but this novel and also The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien are absolutely amazing war books, and they don't read like a war book. They just read like a fictional work, although they're both based off of real events. And I feel like both of these authors dealt with PTSD. I actually wrote a paper comparing the 2 works because I just feel like they're so similar in so many ways. And both of these authors kind of deny that they have any lingering feelings toward the war after they're out of it, but you can definitely see those feelings through their works, and they're definitely both very masterful works dealing with war in the only way in which authors know how. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and will be enjoying this series. If you enjoyed this type of video, definitely comment down below so I can be sure to post more videos like this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and now I'm gonna go get back to reading.